Chapter 4. The Secret of Ramirez. Ramirez is happy that he has finally found someone who will take him to Bermuda. He is only bothered by the fact that he was questioned so much. He told them where he came from, that his son and daughter-in-law died, and about his granddaughter, who lives in Bermuda. He also told them about the ship that got into trouble and that he escaped with the help of the lifeboat. But he didn't tell John and Billy something that really happened on the ship. He likes John and Billy very much and is very sorry that he had to lie. Ramirez didn't want to worry them. He just can't get what happened on that ship out of his head. The reality is that Ramirez had, for some unknown reason, unintentionally traveled through time. He actually dates back to 1921. His granddaughter has probably already died. This is his true story. It all began with the accident when his son and daughter-in-law died. He had booked a ship trip to Bermuda on a large sailing ship to say goodbye to his son and daughter-in-law. He also planned to stay there because he no longer had any relatives in Mexico. His granddaughter was 25 years old at the time and had offered him a room in her house. So his journey began on a rainy day in July, 1921, from the Yucatan Peninsula to Bermuda on the sailing ship Santa Maria. He had moved into a third-class cabin below deck. This had a bed and a closet. The only bathroom and toilet was used by all the guests on this deck. This ship stops in Havana, Cuba, Miami, Florida, the Bahamas, and then sails through the Bermuda Triangle to Bermuda. The journey was quick and without incident. Thanks to the newly installed diesel engines in the lower deck of the ship, the journey was quicker than in the past with this sailing ship, where the ship was dependent on wind and weather. When the wind and ocean current are favorable, the sails are used, and when the weather is unfavorable, the sails are taken down and the engines that drive the two large propellers in the water are used. This meant that the ship arrived on schedule in Havana, Miami and Nassau in the Bahamas, where it was filled up with diesel for the long crossing to Bermuda. Ramirez remembers that the weather was fantastic when the ship left the waters of the Bahamas. The sea was calm and the seagulls flew over the ship, calling loudly. He enjoyed the sunset and then went to sleep in his cabin. When he woke up in the middle of the night, he heard the sailors shouting excitedly and then heard the thunder and noticed the ship bobbing up and down in the waves. The ship had run into a tropical storm. He carefully left the cabin and, leaning against the wall, felt his way to the exit to see what was going on. He had just managed to hold on to the railing when a monstrous wave crashed into the ship. The ship tilted to its side and water began to pour in. With great effort, Ramirez managed to escape outside. A sailor next to him said loudly in a very excited tone, "Quickly into the lifeboats. The ship is starting to sink." Ramirez was lucky and got a place in the lifeboat, but others below deck were hopelessly lost. The large amount of water caught the passengers in their sleep. They drowned and sank with the ship. From a distance, Ramirez saw the last part of the ship sink. It was assumed that around 30 people lost their lives in the shipping accident alone. But the people on board the lifeboats had not yet been rescued. The boats were hopelessly exposed to the current and the waves of the storm. It rained relentlessly and the wind was very strong. Ramirez drifted around in the lifeboat for days, but the time seemed like weeks to him. Some of the people were so thirsty that they drank seawater out of desperation. This finally drove these people crazy. Plagued by hallucinations, they jumped into the water with their last strength and drowned miserably. Ramirez had given up on his life at that point. He had given up hope of being rescued. The heat during the day was relentless, the sun burned mercilessly in the sky. blisters from sunburn on his body were cooled down at night, and it finally rained. Ramirez was thirsty and opened his mouth and drank the refreshing water, which cooled him down and gave him strength. With a little effort, he looked over the edge of the boat and shuddered to see the dorsal fins of sharks circling the boat. Ramirez has seen enough. He knows that if the boat capsizes, these fish will make short work of it. Tiredness overcame him and he began to sleep. Ramirez remembers waking up that night. He couldn't see anything, it was very foggy, and then suddenly there were these strange lights in the sky. They weren't the northern lights. These lights were very intense green, red and blue. Everything was spinning around him. Ramirez felt sick. He threw up and then everything went black around him. Ramirez lost consciousness. When he came to, he was lying on the beach of the small island with the restaurant. To this day he doesn't know how he got there. Someone spoke to him, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" It was the owner of the restaurant. "Where am I?" Ramirez asked and noticed the amulet hanging around his neck. The owner helped him up and took Ramirez to the restaurant. He looked at the modern yachts in amazement. When he got to the restaurant, he was amazed by the television. How is that possible? How did the strange bluish glowing amulet come about around his neck? The news was on TV at the time and he would have fallen over if he hadn't been sitting down. He saw the date. He had traveled over 100 years into the future. The guy asked him where he came from. He played dumb and said he was Ramirez and was just passing through and was willing to do an odd job. The owner offered him food and a room in return for washing the dishes. Ramirez stayed until he met John and Billy. He saw the great yacht and wondered if the two of them were by any chance going to Bermuda. He had planned to go to his granddaughter's address to see if there were any descendants of his family. He knew that his granddaughter had been dead for a long time. Now he is sitting on the bed in his room on the yacht and feels guilty because he lied. But he has to tell them both the truth sooner or later. At least he feels at peace because he paid for their trip with an amulet. This mysterious amulet. He still doesn't know why he had it around his neck. Someone or something must have hung it around his neck when he was unconscious. Ramirez is floating in his thoughts when he suddenly hears alarm. "Everyone on deck.